HOA came onto my property and chopped down a 200-year-old tree my family had protected for generations. She laughed, thinking I couldn't stop her, but she had no idea it was worth $1 million. I walked outside and froze. The HOA president was standing on the stump of my grandfather's 200-year-old white oak, laughing as if she owned the world. All because a few leaves fell into her pool. She didn't know it was a protected heritage species, and that under state law, destroying it could cost her triple damages. This isn't just a tree, it's centuries of family history. And she thought she could take it without consequences. My name is John, and I've lived on this land my entire life, surrounded by memories, history, and one very special companion, a 200-year-old white oak tree planted by my grandfather. That tree wasn't just wood and leaves, it was a living testament to generations, standing tall through storms, droughts, and decades of family milestones. Every branch, every scar in its bark, told a story, a history that no one could replace. I had always assumed it was untouchable, that my family's legacy, preserved through the care of that massive oak, would be respected, but I was wrong. It started with a call from a neighbor, casual at first, about a few leaves falling into her pristine swimming pool. I thought nothing of it. Minor debris, a routine matter. But as I drove home that afternoon, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Something was wrong. The sky was gray, shadows stretching long across the driveway, and there was a tension in the air that I couldn't shake. Then I saw her, the HOA president, arrogant, smug, and standing atop the jagged remains of my grandfather's tree, laughter dripping from her mouth like venom. The tree that had been part of my family for centuries was gone, reduced to sawdust and broken branches. She looked at me as if daring me to confront her, mocking me with her audacity. "I cleaned up your yard for you," she said, her voice sharp and cruel. "You should thank me." My hands shook, but I forced myself to breathe. This wasn't just a personal attack, it was an illegal, malicious act. That white oak was a protected heritage species. Under state tree law, cutting it down wasn't a small misdemeanor. It carried penalties of triple damages. She had no idea the legal storm she had just invited into her life. I immediately began documenting everything. My phone captured her words, the jagged stump, the scattered branches, the destruction she had caused. Old family photos of the tree, letters from historians, and legal documents proving its protected status became my arsenal. This was about justice, history, and accountability, not just a fallen tree. Neighbors began to gather, whispering and pointing. Some were horrified, others afraid to speak out, but I saw a pattern of witnesses forming naturally around me. My lawyer was contacted within the hour. "This isn't just vandalism," he said. "It's a violation of heritage, property rights, and state law. She will pay triple damages, and there's no escaping the consequences." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the yard, I looked at the stump where the mighty oak had stood. I felt anger, yes, but also determination. She thought she could intimidate me, mock me, and walk away unscathed. She was about to learn that destroying what is protected comes at a cost, and I was going to make sure she paid it fully and publicly. This wasn't just about a tree. This was about legacy, respect, and proving that no one, no matter how arrogant or powerful, could destroy something priceless without facing the consequences. The morning after the destruction, I woke up with a heavy weight in my chest. The sight of that jagged stump haunted me, the memory of her laughter echoing in my mind. I knew the HOA president wasn't just careless. She was arrogant, deliberate, and thought she could act above the law, but what she didn't know was that I was just getting started. I began by surveying the damage in detail. The tree's remains were everywhere, sawdust carpeting the grass, massive branches scattered like fallen soldiers, and deep gouges in the earth where the roots had once held firm. I photographed everything meticulously, zooming in on her footprints, the saw marks, and the debris. Every image, every angle was potential evidence. I knew this wasn't just about revenge. It was about building an unassailable case that would ensure she faced the consequences. Next, I reached out to my lawyer, sending him the photographs, videos, and a detailed timeline of the events. "This is beyond a simple violation," I said, my voice tight with anger. "She trespassed, destroyed protected property, and flaunted it in front of witnesses. My lawyer didn't hesitate. We're going to pursue triple damages, report this to the state environmental office, and make sure this gets public exposure. She will regret underestimating you. But legal action alone wouldn't be enough. The HOA president thrived on intimidation, and if I waited passively, she might try to manipulate the narrative, painting me as unreasonable or vengeful. I needed allies, witnesses, and visible evidence of her actions. I spent the next few days canvassing the neighborhood, speaking with neighbors who had watched the events unfold. Some were hesitant, fearful of retaliation, but others were furious at her arrogance. Their stories corroborated mine, and some even offered to provide statements for the legal case. Meanwhile, I began setting up security measures on my property. Motion-activated cameras, floodlights, and discrete audio recording devices were installed around the perimeter. I even mapped potential vantage points where she might attempt another trespass or harassment. Every inch of my land was now monitored, not just for her, but for any HOA operatives who might try similar intimidation tactics. Then came the psychological strategy. I made sure she knew the land was being actively monitored. I posted discrete signs indicating surveillance and legal notices warning of trespassing consequences. It was subtle but effective, a quiet reminder that the property was defended, that her arrogance would no longer be tolerated. At the same time, I documented the White Oak's historical and financial value. Old family photographs, local historical society records, and appraisals all confirmed that the tree wasn't just sentimental. It had a monetary and ecological significance. This wasn't merely about a backyard tree. It was about heritage, legal protections, and holding someone accountable for a wanton, destructive act. I coordinated with my Marine friend, who had experience in security and strategy, to monitor the property during peak hours when the HOA might make a move. Every vehicle that approached was noted, every suspicious movement logged. Their first ambush had been audacious, but they hadn't accounted for preparation, observation, or allies. This time, any attempt to intimidate or trespass would fail spectacularly. Days turned into a week, and tension simmered in the neighborhood. Whispers of her audacity spread. People began discussing her arrogance openly, some frustrated at her sense of entitlement, others relieved to see someone willing to challenge it. The HOA president had made a mistake. She had underestimated not just me, but the legal system, the community, and the consequences of her actions. Finally, I filed the formal complaint with the state environmental office, submitting evidence of the trespass, the destruction, and the tree's protected status. Simultaneously, my lawyer prepared the paperwork for triple damages, including the historical and ecological appraisal of the White Oak. Every detail was documented, every angle covered. By the end of the week, I felt a shift in the air. She had grown cautious, noticeably hesitant when approaching the property. Rumors of the legal filings had spread. The once bold, laughing figure who stood atop my grandfather's tree was now cautious, aware that every move she made could escalate her legal troubles. As I stood in the yard, looking at the jagged stump where the oak had stood, I realized something important. This wasn't just about retaliation. It was about justice, preparation, and sending a message. You can't act above the law, destroy someone's heritage, or intimidate others without consequences. The White Oak's legacy, though physically damaged, was now protected by law, community, and meticulous planning. This week of preparation had transformed fear into control. Anger had become strategy, and the HOA president's arrogance was being systematically dismantled. I was no longer just a victim. I was a force ready to ensure accountability, and she was about to learn that no tree, no matter how rooted, deserved less protection than the family and community willing to defend it. And in that quiet moment, standing amid sawdust and broken branches, I felt the first stirrings of true confidence. The battle wasn't over, but the tide had turned. HOA president had underestimated me, and that would be her greatest mistake. The days following the filings were tense. I could feel it in the air. The HOA president's confidence had cracked. She was cautious, almost paranoid, when approaching the neighborhood, and her usual smirk had disappeared. But I knew she wasn't going to surrender easily. This was the final act, the moment where arrogance meets consequences, and I had to be ready for anything. I spent the morning walking the property, inspecting the cameras and motion sensors. Each piece of equipment was strategically placed to capture any unauthorized entry or attempt at intimidation. The jagged stump of the white oak remained a symbol of both loss and power. It was a visible reminder of the battle, a scar marking where history had been nearly erased but would ultimately prevail. My Marine friend joined me, a silent sentinel, surveying the perimeter with trained eyes. Around noon, the HOA president arrived, accompanied by 2 operatives. They claimed to be inspecting the property, but their movements were deliberate, their expressions full of tension. They had no idea that every step, every word, and every gesture was being recorded. The cameras captured their approach, and I monitored from inside the house, heart pounding but calm. This was not a confrontation fueled by rash emotion. It was calculated, legal, and inevitable. I stepped onto the porch, my presence calm but commanding. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice steady. There was no fear, only authority. She froze for a moment, then smiled, attempting to maintain control. "Just checking the area," she said, her tone forced. "We're concerned about landscaping hazards." I didn't flinch. "This is private property," I replied, "and as you know, trespassing and destroying protected heritage species carries serious legal consequences." I let the words hang in the air, watching her reaction carefully. Her eyes flickered with realization. She now understood that her previous actions had set in motion a series of events she could not escape. One of the neighbors had stepped out, discreetly observing, and another recorded the interaction from across the street. My lawyer was on a video call, ready to document everything in real time if necessary. Every precaution I had taken was about to be validated. The HOA president's smirk wavered. I didn't know it was protected," she stammered, her arrogance faltering. "I was just trying to keep things tidy. You were trespassing and destroying property that has legal and historical protection." I interrupted, voice firm. "This isn't just about tidiness. It's about accountability, responsibility, and respect for heritage. And the law is clear. You are liable for triple damages, including the monetary and historical value of the tree." Her 2 operatives looked at each other nervously. They had participated in the act of destruction and now faced potential legal exposure. One whispered something, and the HOA president glared at them, clearly realizing that she had misjudged the situation entirely. The power dynamic had shifted, and there was no going back. For the next half hour, I calmly walked them through the situation, explaining the evidence I had collected. Photographs, video recordings, witness statements, historical documentation, and legal filings. Each point I made chipped away at her remaining confidence. She tried to argue, tried to deflect, but the sheer weight of documented evidence was undeniable. Finally, she raised her hands in resignation. "Fine," she muttered. "We'll cooperate." Her voice lacked conviction. It was a surrender to reality, not a voluntary act of contrition. I nodded, maintaining composure. This was not about revenge. It was about justice. After they left, I walked back to the stump of the white oak, taking a deep breath. I felt a mixture of triumph, relief, and profound respect for what had been lost and what had been preserved. That tree may have been physically destroyed, but its legacy, the legal, historical, and emotional value, was intact. Its protection had been reinforced, and the HOA president's arrogance had been exposed to the community and the law. I spoke briefly with neighbors who had gathered discreetly. Their support was evident in nods, smiles, and quiet words of encouragement. What had started as a personal violation had become a statement. Property rights, heritage, and law cannot be trampled with impunity. Message was clear, and it resonated beyond my own backyard. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the yard, I reflected on the lessons learned. Preparation, evidence, legal knowledge, and strategic thinking were more powerful than anger alone. Arrogance might prompt someone to act recklessly, but accountability ensures that every action has consequences. I realized that I had not only defended a tree, I had defended a principle, a legacy, and a message to anyone who might consider similar reckless behavior. In the following weeks, legal proceedings advanced smoothly. The HOA president faced fines, triple damages, and a permanent record of her actions. The operatives who assisted her were also held accountable. The neighborhood, once tense and divided, now understood the importance of standing up for property rights and heritage protection. Standing in the yard one last time, looking at the remnants of the oak, I felt a deep sense of closure. Justice had been served, lessons had been learned, and the legacy of the white oak would be remembered not for its destruction, but for the resilience and determination it inspired. The HOA president had underestimated me, underestimated the law, and underestimated the power of preparation. She had crossed a line, and the consequences were undeniable. And as I walked inside my home, I realized this: some battles are about more than what's visible. They are about principles, courage, and making sure that no one else will dare repeat the same mistakes. This was the end of one battle, but the lesson would echo for generations. Heritage, law, and accountability cannot be ignored.